I know by far I'm not the first person to talk about the M1 chip in the MacBook Air, and you've probably seen countless benchmarks and speed tests and that kind of thing, so to make my review a bit more personal, I'm mainly going to be talking about how the M1 chip MacBook Air, this is actually the version with the 8-core GPU, so it's not the 7-core, so it's not the slowest MacBook Air, but still, it's a fanless architecture rocking Apple Silicon, and how it compares to my iMac Pro that is just about to turn 3 years old, and I spent $6,000 on it at the tail end of 2017. So how close to that experience can a $1,000 laptop give you? That's what we're talking about in today's video. Let's begin. So, I don't review a lot of laptops on my channel, and as you guys know, I'm very Apple-centric as a whole, and I'm confident in saying this is the most impressive laptop I have ever reviewed on this channel. I actually never even got to review the 2018 MacBook Air refresh a few years back, just because I felt like it was so similar to the 13-inch MacBook Pro that you didn't really need my feedback on it, but now that I've finally got a more recent generation MacBook Air, man, how long has it been since I reviewed a MacBook Air at all? Ooh. Okay. It's been a while, so it's safe to say this is one of the largest jumps in CPU and GPU performance we've ever seen in an Apple machine, especially if you consider the last MacBook Air that came out was like 5 months ago, and I feel so bad for anybody who bought that. But the impressive thing about this MacBook Air is how it is able to keep up with my workflow, and in case you're curious, I edited all of the videos necessary for the Tailosive network for the past couple weeks exclusively on the MacBook Air. As soon as I unboxed it, I stopped using my iMac Pro, I pushed it to the side and left it turned off, and basically edited all the tech videos, all the EV videos, even some vlogs on the MacBook Air, and I did all of my live streams over on Twitch using the MacBook Air as well, using the Elgato Cam Link and the Blackmagic camera I have set up over there, 1080p at 60 FPS, and it was able to flawlessly keep up with everything I needed. In some metrics, I would even go as far as to say that it outperformed the iMac Pro, especially when it came to real-time playback of content within the Final Cut Pro timeline, which is mainly the high-intensive stuff I do. So if you want me to talk about gaming performance or how it handles Logic or Xcode, I'm sorry, I don't play games on the MacBook Air, and you probably shouldn't either. I don't use Logic for much, and I don't use Xcode, so I'm not going to be able to give you feedback on those things, but what I can tell you a lot about is how it handled Final Cut Pro and OBS, to which I'm happy to say it handled it great, and I even got some comments of people saying that OBS was looking better on the MacBook Air because I was able to crank up the kilobits per second a little bit more with the MacBook Air, which is awesome. And when it came to real-time playback in Final Cut, there was less lag, and I noticed that I could speed up clips or change the time speed at how fast they're playing and not really experience much lag or buffering like I do on my iMac Pro, which may just be because it's getting old and those old Intel Xeon processors are just not as good at keeping up with brand new silicon. So it's safe to say iMac Pro probably not as fast as it was on day one, but I actually did an export test where I put the same 4K at 60 footage I'm using to record right now using my Blackmagic cameras. I put 5-minute clips in Final Cut on both of these machines and hit export at pretty much the exact same time. This is not an exact science, but I hit export on both of them, all the same export settings, the settings I normally use for uploading my videos, and the iMac Pro finished exporting in around 12.5 minutes, and the MacBook Air finished exporting at around 15 minutes. So, okay, sorry to burst your bubble. The M1 MacBook Air is not quite as fast at exporting as the iMac Pro, but hey, how can we complain here? The iMac Pro has this amazing thermal architecture with 2 fans going, and it was $6,000 when it first came out, and this is around $1,200 when it's first launching because I got the higher tiered model, and it's getting a little less than 2.5 minutes longer export times on a 5-minute clip. So that would mean if I was exporting something that was 10 minutes long, MacBook Air would take around 5 minutes longer. So not bad if you consider how much cheaper this machine is and the fact that there's no fan, okay? The whole time I'm using this thing, it's completely silent, and it's built in this really thin, really light architecture you could easily throw in a backpack. It's extremely light for the amount of power it's packing, and you can still charge this thing with a basic 30-watt brick. I think you can even charge it with an 18-watt USB-C brick if you want to, whereas the iMac Pro is a fully fledged desktop pulling all of its power hammer from a wall. And it has a dedicated GPU as well. M1 chip has an integrated GPU, and it's still able to keep up, and when it comes to the playback and real-time experience of Final Cut, it's doing better. And okay, the export times aren't quite as fast, but point being, it can do it. And when streaming with OBS, it definitely gets hot. You can tell. If you touch it, you can feel a little bit of heat to it, but I've run a lot of laptops in the past to as hot as they can possibly go, and the fact that without a fan, it's able to keep up with my workflow that requires streaming, you know, a constant 1080 at 60 file to the internet at a fairly high bitrate. Anytime I run OBS on my iMac Pro, I usually hear the fans kick in, and you can make a lot of computers hurt with OBS just because it consumes a lot of the CPU and as much as the GPU as it can. And the fact that the M1 chip did not even drop a frame while I was live streaming, I was super impressed by. And knowing that between the Mac Mini and the 13-inch MacBook Pro, the performance is only going to be better with those things because they have fans in them, says a lot about Apple Silicon in this first wave transition. When it comes to the laptop itself, it's a fairly traditional design. You know, I can say I'm pretty surprised that a headphone jack is still being shipped in Apple machines in 2020. Not saying that's a bad thing. I know some of you like it, but I don't know. I just feel like the MacBook Air demographic probably uses AirPods anyway. And some changes to the keyboard that I had to look up and check and see if they were actually new with the M1 chip or if these had been implemented for a while, but they are actually new. They have replaced the backlit keyboard buttons, which I could see some people being a little bit annoyed by. Personally, I don't mind the automatic backlit lighting and how it adjusts to different scenarios I'm in. It seems to work okay for me, so I haven't really missed being able to adjust keyboard brightness on the fly, but if you do like doing that, sorry, I guess you miss out on it. Instead, they've replaced some of those buttons with a do not disturb key, which I've found pretty useful. If you're in the middle of something and you want the computer to shut up, you can just press one button and be like, don't talk to me, I don't want any notifications. And when you want to turn do not disturb off, you just have one button to press it again, which is kind of handy. The Spotlight search button is also kind of neat. If you want to pull up something random from Spotlight, you can literally just tap one button now. I'm used to doing Command Space, but if it's one button away, hey, that saves me some time. And between the two, they also added a dictation button, which I was also not really expecting because, I don't know, I just don't find myself often using a MacBook with dictation, like talking into it for texting or typing. I mean, occasionally, I guess, I can understand someone using it, and as an accessibility feature, I totally agree. It's super helpful for those of you who can't type on the keyboard very easily for some reason and just need dictation as a backup, but I don't know, it just feels a little odd to have that there for everybody, and it's not even optional, but they had to put something there, so dictation, not the worst choice they could have put. You know, they could have put the Slofi button there, made this product an actual win in my book. But also Touch ID, I forget how nice it is every time I review a MacBook because I'm used to my iMac Pro, which, yeah, I have an Apple Watch and you can use Unlock Mac with Apple Watch, but sometimes it's just a little slow. Sometimes you open up the computer and it has to buffer a little bit. It's like turning on with Apple Watch and it has to think about it for a second. At first I thought maybe just the iMac Pro was getting old with that problem, but I turned it on with the MacBook Air and I even started noticing it sometimes opening up and thinking, hold on, unlocking with the Apple Watch, whereas Touch ID, a lot more reliably, I can just place my finger there and it unlocks very quickly. And it's also super duper helpful for whenever you need to enter passwords or install certain software or change certain security settings, and instead of having to enter your password every time, you can just rest your finger there. I know I've talked about this before, but I would really love it if they could bring Touch ID to a Magic Keyboard. I know it would be expensive and they would have to add a secure enclave to the keyboard, and I don't know. I mean, Apple's not past selling expensive keyboards. Look at the Magic Keyboard. Okay, that's $350. So how crazy would it be to also sell a Magic Keyboard for the Mac that was $350 but gave you Touch ID? I would love it, but a better approach would probably just be add Face ID to the Mac. Speaking of no Face ID, the webcam still sucks, okay? If there was one issue I had to complain about with the MacBook Air, it would have to be the webcam. But sometimes we must ask ourselves, are we being too hard on the 720p webcam? No, we're not. Oh dear God, no. Okay, look, if a $400 iPhone is able to take pictures that look almost spot on quality with DSLR cameras, then yeah, I'm sorry, we're gonna expect MacBooks that cost north of $1,000 to at least get a little bit better than 720p, okay? I'm not saying it has to be as good as an iPhone rear-facing camera. I'm just saying asking for full HD shouldn't be too hard in 2020. More people working from home with the pandemic. I don't care what kind of computational crap your M1 chip does. Shouldn't be this this hard to at least put the iMac Pro webcam from 2017 into a machine like this. I don't care if you gotta make the display lid a little bit thicker. If you're willing to put 4K 60 frame a second cameras onto iPads, which we know most people are never going to use in their life, then I think it's safe to say it wouldn't be that overkill to put some type of slightly better webcam on a machine this expensive. If you're looking for a machine that's great for FaceTime calls, I'm still gonna recommend the iPad every day of the week. But okay, done with the webcam rant. We all agree 720p, not good enough. And if you don't agree, you're wrong and your preferences are incorrect. The speakers are also shockingly impressive for a device this small, and if you see the teardowns, you know that the actual speakers themselves are a lot smaller than these little grills on the side. It may seem wasteful to have all those little dots not doing anything, but either way, I love them. They sound great, and they're more directed at you than the iPad Pro, so I appreciate that aspect. And the trackpad is also enormous for a device this size, especially since I'm used to using the Magic Keyboard on my iPad Pro, and I've kind of gotten used to that. So now going with a 13-inch notebook, the fact that this is fairly light and fairly portable and still able to keep a trackpad this size is amazing. And battery life that is enabled by the M1 chip is such a sweet cherry on top, because with MacBooks in general, if you're using them for power-intensive things, you pretty much always have to be near an outlet or at least planning your next charge, especially if you're gonna do something like export a video with Final Cut or live stream with OBS like I do. In those cases, yeah, I still see battery life end up being pretty short. Like if I'm disconnected from power and I want to edit a video and export a video, I can still see myself losing around 25 to 30% of the charge just with that export alone, and then after that you gotta upload it and everything. When you're doing basic tasks though, okay, when you're just browsing social media or using Safari and looking around online for stuff, that's when the battery life really truly does shine, and I noticed it barely even budging as long as I didn't open OBS or Final Cut. So if your thought process is the MacBook Air means you're never gonna have to charge in the day anymore, that pretty much only applies if you're doing light tasks like, I don't know, PowerPoint or writing essays or browsing the web, checking email, those kinds of things, yeah, you could last all day, but if you're using it for high-intensive programs, be ready to charge. But either way though, there were a few mornings where I was using the MacBook Air and barely even seeing a drop of percent over like an hour of usage, and that was really, really impressive to me, and I think it's a great benefit of Apple switching to their own silicon. There's pretty much nothing but benefits here except for lack of boot camp, but in case you were curious about the Geekbench results, I did do one to compare it to my iMac Pro, even through the iPad Pro in there just for fun, and the multi-core score on the iMac Pro is a little bit ahead, but they're still really not that far off. And it's incredible to me that, you know, when you think about it, this has 8 cores and 4 of them I believe are clocked at 3.2 gigahertz. Kind of the same thing with the iMac Pro. I got the base model way back when, and that has an 8-core CPU and they're clocked at 3.2 gigahertz. I know it's a little different because high efficiency cores, but still, it's impressive to me that a machine like this that was truly state-of-the-art at the time it came out and really, really fast for how much it was costing, now compared to what you can get in a laptop with no fans for so light and operating on a fraction of the power, it's insanity. And I don't think there's ever going to be a giant leap like this in terms of Apple hardware in the future. I know that there's some mini LED displays coming later and that will help with dynamic range, and I do agree that the MacBook Air does have a little bit of a traditional dated design. I know this new design technique was just recently brought to the MacBook Air in 2018, but come on, we've been seeing MacBooks designed like this ever since the 2015 12-inch MacBook. You know, it's fanless, it's got a wedge design, it's got USB-C, and this is just kind of a tinkered version of that. So it feels fairly familiar. Again, no butterfly keys, so thankfully we got a bit more of a reliable keyboard now, but still, design-wise, it's no looker. You know, it looks fairly similar to what we've seen in MacBook Airs for years, but when it comes to just what I think most Mac users care about, which is performance and how well the software behaves with Mac OS, this is a monumental, huge leap, and I'm extremely impressed with it. So personally, after reviewing the MacBook Air myself, I would encourage everybody to not get the M1 chip for the 13-inch MacBook Pro. I think that battery life might be a little bit better, but I'm not sure how noticeable it'll be in day-to-day use, and I think that you can save a lot of money and get a lot better performance or more storage if you just stick with the MacBook Air and just live without the touch bar. I know some of you love the touch bar, I love it too, but personally, I just think they're too similar to each other, and I don't think the fan in the MacBook Pro is going to make that big a difference. performance in the speed tests I've been looking at comparing it to the MacBook Pro. I wouldn't recommend it. So Mac Mini is obviously great if you're more of a desktop fan, but if you're looking for a laptop and you want the chip to be blazing fast and you want it to be light and thin, MacBook Air is a great way to go. If some of you are wondering, Drew, are you going to keep the MacBook Air and replace your iMac Pro with it? Sorry, no. The main reason being the I/O. This product simply just doesn't fit my workflow very well, but it's not the M1 chip's fault. Let me be clear there, because the performance and the integrated GPU and how they performed was amazing. The only issue I'm stemming with it is, for one, 13-inch display, little bit small for me and what I'm used to with editing. I've just gotten so comfortable with a 27-inch display, and yeah, I have connected a 32-inch monitor to the MacBook Air in the past, but the main issue with that is only having 2 USB-C ports, which is a huge bottleneck for my workflow because I'm plugging in the cam link for my camera, the zoom for my microphone, plus the CFast card reader for my CFast cards that I record these videos with, and I have to make sure to charge the thing, so I also have to have power nearby. And yeah, you can do all of that with an adapter, but it gets very cluttered, and the main reason it would be an issue to replace my iMac Pro entirely with this machine is the 2 USB-C ports are only on one side, which doesn't sound like it'd be a big deal, but when you're used to working at a desk, because I need a mouse to edit faster, it's very, very annoying and very, very inconvenient to have to stretch all of your cables and all of your accessories to the left side of the laptop. And I could maybe even get by with 2 USB-C ports if they were on either end, but the good news is my iMac Pro is still doing okay, and I can keep using it. I can still get by with it. I don't need to replace it immediately, so I might as well just wait for the redesigned iMacs and the better Apple Silicon to come. This product specifically doesn't fit my workflow right, so I'm gonna wait for a desktop with Apple Silicon. And if my iMac Pro died right now, I would probably still opt for a Mac Mini, just for that extra I/O in the back. And if the new iMacs are too expensive or the design isn't good, I'd probably still wait for the 16-inch MacBook Pro with Apple Silicon, because I want to get something that outperforms my iMac Pro in every metric, including export times, and I also need more I/O than this. So, what do you guys think of the M1 MacBook Air? Are you guys enjoying it or watching this video on it? Feel free to let me know. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.